So certainly what I want to do today is just open it up. I think that there's probably a number of questions, maybe a wide variety of questions based on the fact that we have the new information from the CDC, but then we also have just a lot of other COVID related questions for schools, and we haven't met in a long time. So I guess what I would do is just ask for you guys to open it up with any questions that you might have.
All right, I'll start it off. Good afternoon, Kathy. Thanks for doing this.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, so I'm just wondering, I mean, as you said, you had to postpone the meeting and everything on Friday. So what have those discussions been? I mean, what is your approach going to be going forward? What's different about what you're doing now based on this new guidance?
Yeah, I think that was the question that all of us had on Friday when we heard that information was sort of dropping. Now, having had some time to review that, the CDC guidance really follows and outlines much of what we're already doing and what we are doing here in Monroe County and New York State. So I think that was comforting in that there wasn't anything so vastly different around that guidance. At this point, I know what we've talked about is the fact that we need the New York State Department of Health. Obviously, they need some time to review all of that and then consider if there's anything that's going to be changed within the guidelines from New York State Department of Health that would come from them. So I'm anticipating that we might see something come out from them, either reinforcing what they already have issued to us or maybe making some changes or modifications to that.
Something interesting in there, you know, it says if community rate goes up, that could affect, you know, how you change things, maybe going to hybrid if it goes up or anything like that, but also says that elementary could stay fully in person even if community rate rises. I mean, is this different than anything you've been looking at throughout or so far? Or, I mean, do you have any idea of how that might change now looking at that?
Yeah, no, you know, I think, so one big takeaway that I got out of reading that guidance and the more that we've had conversations is the idea that, I mean, we have a lot, almost half of schools across the country that have been in a fully remote model. So when you read through that guidance and you really talk a lot about that, you're talking about a lot of recommendations for schools that have not had any kids on campus at all. And so this whole idea of reopening schools, when we're talking about it, we want more of our kids, we want to like fully open and have all of our kids on campus. And really, we forget that there's a lot of schools out there that haven't had any kids on campus. So I think that's one big takeaway. And then your point around the younger kids, that has really been talked about throughout, just the idea that spread is generally like we can control little kids in their bubble, so to speak, a little bit easier than we can older kids. And so that guidance may be looking different for elementary versus a secondary student. So that's not necessarily new. I think it's still the hard part for us is 6 foot social distancing is continued to be like that's, I think it's mentioned like 34 times in the CDC document. So there was no relief on that 6 foot piece, which is really one of the major obstacles that we have in terms of bringing more kids in by and large when you look across our districts.
Kathy, it's Berkeley Breen at News 10 NBC. Do you foresee any school districts in Monroe County reopening 5 days a week before the end of the school year?
Well, that would be really difficult for me. I would never speak for another district. I mean, I do know that there have been some of the surrounding areas, not necessarily in Monroe County, who have been able to bring their kids back 5 days a week. Most of them have been pretty small districts who have a decent sized footprint in terms of their buildings and grounds and could spread kids out differently and also have lower cohorts in terms of sizes of or class sizes. So I think that's the hard part is all of those variables and factors differ among all of us. And I think if there was a way for us to do that at this point and still follow the guidance in terms of social distancing and all of the other requirements, I think we would have already done it by now. We want to have our kids back. And I think that the piece for us is we're struggling too with trying to ensure safety. And as much as we want our kids back, and we have a group of parents who are truly desperate to get their kids back for a number of different reasons, all very good reasons. We also have a large group of families who are really still very nervous about having their kids in school and want to make sure that distancing is really adhered to, and that all of those safety protocols are strongly adhered to. So it's a tough position because we have to enforce the requirements, and then we're also trying to meet the needs of all our constituents and families.
What about, not speak on behalf of any of the other districts, but what about Greece? If the CDC were to relax the 6-foot social distancing policy, do you think you could reopen 5 days a week, and would you want to do that?
So I want nothing more than to get our kids back in school. So I can say that with 100% like clarity and certainty. I want our kids back. I want them to be safe, both of those things. The thing for me, and I've said this a number of times, the thing for me that makes it impossible for me to do this, and I have this conversation a lot because our families are asking, is the 6-foot piece. Most of our classes, so in a large district with almost 11,000 kids, most of my class sizes are 25, 26, which is different. If I'm in a rural school district and have 15, 16 in a cohort or in a group, that is very different than when you've been maximizing class size all along, and then you try to do that with 6 foot, it just doesn't work. And that's even if we're using all swing spaces and other square footage within the system. So that is a barrier for me. And that's the thing that unless that changes, I can say, I don't think I can bring, all of our kids back. 5 days a week, I should say, just to clarify. I will say, just as a quick FYI, we were just this past week, we brought about 800 kids back right before February break who were fully remote. So in our efforts to continue to try to get more kids back to school, that is one of the things that we've really worked on too, is for our kids who've been fully remote, making sure that there are opportunities for them to come back into the hybrid setting if they want. For example, the week right before break, we welcomed back about 800 kids to an in-school, in-person setting, which we were really proud about and happy to have. I think, as we continue to go forward, and then we're using our Wednesdays a little bit differently too, in terms of having some of our more disengaged kids come and attend and do some things on campus on those days. So there are a lot of things that we're trying uniquely to do to try to get more kids on campus and to fill the class sizes as much as we possibly can while still maintaining the 6 foot distancing in those pieces. But yes, Berkeley, to your point, that is a barrier.
Hi, Kathy. It's Lowell from Spectrum News. And in addition to the 6 foot distance, what are some other hurdles that you believe your district and other districts in the county could face when the time comes to fully reopen?
So the 6 foot distancing is a big piece. The other piece, because that also applies on buses. So for transportation right now, that is a gigantic hurdle in terms of trying to transport and get kids to school when I can only, I'm pushing it to get 21 kids on a bus where normally I might have 60 on a bus. So you can imagine in a time when we have a crisis in terms of trying to find bus drivers, we have, a lot of runs and a lot of students. To be able to do that, you would be doubling and tripling your runs to be able to get kids into school with transportation. So the transportation piece is a big barrier or hurdle for us because of the guidance that applies on buses as well. That's probably the main thing. I mean, the other big things that they talk about in terms of mitigation relative to the cleaning, the masking, all of those pieces, like we have done the contact tracing, I feel like we've handled incredibly well as a school district in combination with our Monroe County Department of Health. We have that rolling very, very smoothly. The hardest parts are the distancing and the busing, really.
And one second thing, I know when it talked about testing, what I saw there it looked like more so on a referral basis, or if a teacher or student is showing symptoms. What's your take here in the county on what should happen? I know when Rochester was talking about coming back, there was a big uproar because they originally took off the testing option. What do you believe should be the policy coming back if schools were to reopen fully?
Yeah, I feel like testing should be available. So to me, I think, one of the things that we have advocated for are clearer metrics around what would be and what would make it safe so that we could reopen. And so we specifically, I know my board president and I just actually sent a letter to Governor Cuomo specifically asking for some clearer metrics along with access to vaccination and also along with access to testing. So to your point, the testing that we have done within the school districts when we were put in the orange zone, while that was a hurdle to sort of figure out the process for getting that done and doing that, we only had to end up doing 5% of our staff, or students and staff, sorry. But once we figured that out, it's really not a hard process. And what it did is it gave us security that our rate in schools was much below the community rate. So that was really nice and comforting to know that that wasn't like that we were keeping our kids safe in schools. So to me, the idea of kids and our schools having access to testing makes a ton of sense. It's something that, as we've talked to Dr. Mendoza, he's continued to advocate and support us in terms of any testing that we want to do in school, and also advocating to ensure that we have the test kits available to us and how we want to use them. So I think, so for my opinion, I feel like those should be available, and we should be, if we're going to be reopening, that should be a measure we use to at least get a sense and pulse for the rates within our school walls.
And I know it's really soon. Will this be something you do on a weekly basis, bi-weekly basis?
So I mean, I think I can go back to just simply when we were in the orange zone, we were testing 5% a week. It was sort of a rolling group. It was an ongoing process, and it gave us a sense of sort of like our general number. I think that would make a whole lot of sense if we were going to be reopening and bringing all kids back to keep something like that in place. And that, again, that's something that we lean on our medical professionals in order to make recommendations. But Dr. Mendoza and the Department of Health has been clear around the importance of testing and the helpfulness of that in terms of really understanding where you sit relative to the community.
Hey, Kathy, I wanted to, Andrew with 13 here. I want to bring up high school sports, the return of that. Fairport wrote a letter, the Fairport district, to state leaders, county leaders, saying, if kids can play basketball and bump into each other on the court and not be 6 feet apart at all, why can't they be in a classroom where they're also not 6 feet apart? How can you determine the difference between those two things and say the kids, the 6 feet apart is an issue bringing kids back to the classroom, but not on an athletic field?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's certainly, like, that was the number one question when the high risk sports were approved, that all of us had. And I think, the answer to that, and I share this, being a bit cautious with how I share it, but the reality of it is sport is an extracurricular. So when we talked about it, it came, the recommendation around why they would allow or recommend a high risk sport be able to play is it's a choice, it's extracurricular, there's a much smaller number of kids participating in something like that, versus being engaged in school is mandatory. Everybody has to come to school. You've got higher numbers, you don't necessarily have that choice, and there should be sort of a higher level of scrutiny, I guess, put on like the guidelines within that school environment. So that was, when that was described to me, that made a little bit more sense, but it still is hard because there's some conflict there that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense when you're talking about a pretty intense game of basketball or wrestling where kids are touching, and why that wouldn't be a risk. I think there is risk, and I think through all of this, the recognition has been there is risk in all of this, and that part of this whole situation is is gradually sort of implementing some newer things and then seeing and monitoring and making adjustments based on that. Because the other thing that came out, and Dr. Mendoza was clear on that, if there is a problem that he can always, and we can always stop and shut something down. And that if we were concerned about safety, that we would do so.
And thanks, Kathy. I also wanted to bring up vaccinations with teachers. I'm not sure if you're privy to all the numbers, or maybe you can just talk about Greece, but how is that process going? And do you consider that a key step to getting kids back fully into the classroom, whether that's this year, school year, or in the fall?
Yeah. So we are, I can say clearly on behalf of superintendents that we're advocating strongly to get our teachers and staff vaccinated. So, I have 1,100 teachers, but I have over 3,000 employees, and all of them are important, and all of them are on the front lines working with kids in different ways in our schools. So we're working really hard to advocate on behalf of them to make sure that we all are vaccinated. We are just in the process of getting numbers for that. So some people, some districts have said that they're close to, they think almost 50% of their people have been vaccinated. Our survey goes out, for example, in Greece on Monday. I think a lot of people are doing it after the break to get better numbers in terms of where we sit right now as far as who has been fully vaccinated, who's in process, and who might be declining, just so that we have better numbers. And we're going to be sharing that with the Department of Health as well, just so that we have a general idea across the board. I know that the county has partnered with us in really trying to help us prioritize and get some of our bus drivers. We worked last week to get a bunch of them in and get appointments. Many of our bus drivers are older individuals and maybe more vulnerable for different reasons, and also have a little bit more trouble with the technology part to it. So we really wanted to help and assist with getting them appointments, which many of them got in last week. But I know we have many more to do. And our hope, like I said, next week is to have better numbers in terms of where we really sit, and then continue to really plug and getting more and more done before the end of the year for sure. Thanks.
I had another question in regards to the UK strain. We've heard, the CDC say that could be the dominant strain by March. So, I mean, is this kind of part of what you're thinking about in the long term with schools? I mean, really not even long term, just another month. I mean, do you think that could affect staying open for you guys?
So I feel like I think we will stay open. So let me just say, I feel like this year has been an important year because we started off with really low numbers. We spiked a bit, we've come down, and throughout that, we have shown that schools can stay open in this hybrid model. I think the UK strand and the variants do have people concerned, and I think that's also why we may not see a whole lot of relief relative to the 6-foot piece. So I think that 6-foot piece, when you think about the mitigation strategies relative to masking and social distancing being the two key things, I think that we're going to likely not see much relief. I don't know that because I'm not the people making that decision, but it would be my guess that we won't see that because of the variants that are coming and what they're saying about them. So I think what we might find is, I guess, a little leeway related to that based on the variants. And that's just me in my opinion. I could be completely wrong.
Kathy, I'll ask you another question. I shared some enrollment numbers through Laurel, and a decrease in enrollment across all the public schools in Monroe County. Are you concerned about this drop in enrollment this year?
So I mean, I think drop in enrollment is important to look at. So when you look at numbers and you look at, were you referring to bed stay data?
I'm referring to I got the data directly from New York State Department of Education.
Okay.
So it's their numbers and it's comparing the same numbers to the previous
Sure.
4 or 5 years.
So a couple of things about that. So this year has been a unique year. I'm not like really worried about that, because what I look at when I look at enrollment, particularly for this year, is our kindergarten numbers are extremely low. So, and I think that's true across the county. So a lot of families, when given the choice whether to send their child to kindergarten for the first time, particularly since you don't have to right when they are eligible, may not have. So I think our kindergarten numbers are low across. Homeschooling numbers were up this year. So if you looked at homes, I don't know if you've gotten that far into the data, but we always have a number of families who choose to homeschool. That number has gone up. And then we also have the migration and the choice to go to privates. So given that some of our private counterparts in the elementary and secondary are offering 5 days a week, some families who were able chose that because they were going to be paying for childcare on those off days, or maybe couldn't manage it for one reason or another. It might not have even, none of them might have been their first choice, but I think given the circumstances, I think many people chose one of those 3 things because of the circumstances with the pandemic this year. And I don't necessarily see that always staying the same. So I think in most years, I think we'll see a bump right back up with kindergarten. I think we'll get, our homeschooler families, some of them back, and many of the privates will come back to us as well, like they normally do. So.
Would you agree, though, that the decrease we saw this year as compared to other years is a sign that parents just aren't happy with the hybrid remote model?
Well, I think it's a sign of families struggling to figure out how to manage their life. I mean, I think in this, all of us have really struggled during the pandemic around how do you navigate childcare for 2 days a week or 3 days a week within this hybrid model. That's not necessarily easy for everyone to do. So if I have an option of being able to sign my kid up for a private setting that is meeting 5 days a week, that might be what I choose to do because it works for me in my situation this year. In the same way that there are some families who've chosen to homeschool because they're really nervous about sending their kids even into a hybrid setting. So I think what we're dealing with is parents who across the board are struggling, and there's no one situation that is fitting any one family's needs really perfectly. So some want 5 days a week, some want their kids still fully remote, some are homeschooling because of that, some are sending to private because they desperately need 5 days a week. So I think we sort of are seeing everything under the sun in terms of what families want and need. And I don't think we have a perfect answer. I mean, I would love to have a perfect answer and be able to have kids in 5 days a week for who want it, and also be able to provide remote and every option in between. And we've struggled to do that.
Are you worried that the children won't come back who left this year?
I think most families want to be back. I mean, I think most people want their kids in school, and if given the choice, if they feel like it's a safe place and secure with that, I think that they will want their kids and send their kids back. I think it's still unknown for so many. There's still new things coming out. The variants are coming out. The numbers are decreasing in the county, and there's some really good signs, but I think it's going to take people a little bit of time before they feel really comfortable and are ready to do that in some cases.
Kathy, I got one more too. Want to ask about just looking ahead based on the data we have now, where we think things might be going. Do you think next year, is it realistic to say in the fall, start of the new school year, things will still be hybrid, or do you think kids can be fully back into a classroom by fall?
I am incredibly hopeful that we will be in the fall, like all of our kids. Like in my perfect world, and believe me, like I'm saying this without, I don't have a lot of science behind it. I don't know, and I've been wrong, like I said, more than I've been right this year. But I would see us with most of the same protocols in terms of like our cleaning, our disinfecting, masking, a lot of the things that we have just sort of built into our system, I can see continuing. I would love to see that with all of our kids back, and the relief on the social distancing part of it. And that's to say, like, I don't know what's coming with us. You know, I mean, I can't look ahead and know exactly what's going to happen with variants or with numbers and things like that. But my hope is if we can keep our numbers decreasing, if we continue to get more people vaccinated, if all of these things, if we can work really hard as a community to get to a better place, that we will be able to do that in the fall. That would be my perfect world. And that's what I'm planning for. I mean, what I'm looking ahead to is, you know, graduations and being able to do things with larger groups outside. I'm looking ahead to sort of this gradual, like being able to do summer school in person, being able to bring all the kids back in the fall. That's the way we're planning for, in the most optimistic way. Sure.
All right, Kathy, here's the trifecta. Another question from me. All right. This actually came up in some of our morning meetings. Is if there can be sports, why can't there be theater or band or chorus, any of those other extracurriculars? And when do you think you see that happening in schools?
So we see that happening this spring. One of the things, so once that decision was made around high risk sports, we pulled our, I mean, I'm speaking for space. I don't know exactly what every other district has done, but we did pull our music directors together and like folks who run our extracurriculars to talk about what we are going to do this spring. So like, for example, marching band, I know in Greece is moving right ahead. They actually worked all fall together as well. So we're not taking away necessarily the guidance, but a musical, for example, we can work on with social distancing. And there are just some things that our musical directors are going to be working on. We have one group at one of our schools who's doing a virtual performance, but then a couple of virtual performances, but then we have a couple who I know are going to be working on doing something in person with that. And the same thing with bands and choruses. I think it's just a matter of making sure that you have the right spacing and setup. So I know that some of that never stopped for some districts. And then I know some were kind of paused, but are now looking into it for the spring, particularly because of that sort of relief in sports. Just the idea of, but they're still adhering to 6 foot, or in music, I think it's 10 foot. So it's got to be a little bit longer or bigger. But I guess, Berkeley, to your point, I think the determination around sports gave us a little bit of like more latitude to say, hey, like make sure you're considering all of these things. I will use another example. At our elementaries, we hadn't been doing extracurriculars. So we were struggling. There were some busing issues. There were some issues around spacing and so on. I know for the spring, our elementary principals are going to be convening next week to talk about what kinds of extracurricular things they're going to run for the spring session going forward. So, and again, the kids are so excited about that. That in many cases are what gets them to school. So we're excited to be able to start a lot of those. All right, we good? All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy.
Good afternoon.
You too, thanks.